Jones, please report to 305.
I'm in the middle of something here.
A.
Hey everybody, welcome. It's Wednesday. I'm not there, but we're still going to have economics. So here's the plan. We are going to talk about our next economic indicator. Again, economic indicators are things that we use to measure how healthy our economy is. We've talked a lot about GDP, which measures the production that businesses have made over the past year. So now we're going to talk about the next big one, which is unemployment. In some cases, unemployment impacts individual people like you and me way more than GDP does, which is why unemployment as an economic indicator in some cases is considered even more important than GDP, depending on who you ask. So let's start from the top. First of all, we've talked about two terms already. We had an intro day last week and we defined both of these terms, but here they are again. So remember, unemployment, or to be unemployed, is when you are actively looking for a job, but you're unable to find one. So this means that babies are not technically considered unemployed. They're not counted in the unemployment rate. Retired people are not counted. Maybe many of you. If you're not looking for a job, well, then you're not unemployed. You're just not a worker. That's okay. The unemployment rate then is the number we use to measure the economy. It's a percentage, and it's the percentage of this group of people we call the civilian labor force. And it's the percentage of those people that are currently unemployed. Now here's the thing. When our government keeps track of unemployment, they need to be more specific than simply measuring who's actively looking for a job but doesn't have one. And so there's actually 4 criteria that our government tries to think through before they consider somebody unemployed and thus add them to our unemployment rate. And so if you are, number 1, actively looking for work in the past week, number 2, you're currently available for work, meaning if somebody called you now and offered you a job, you'd be able to start, in the next day or so. Number 3, if you're waiting to be called back after you've been fired from your previous job, so maybe sometimes people will have to get, like if I should say, let's say your boss fired you and was like, I really don't want to do this, but the economy is bad, we just got to let some people go, but we will call you back when things are looking better. But if you haven't gotten that call yet, if you're waiting to be called back after being fired, well, that's what we're talking about. And then the 4th one, if you're waiting for more than 30 days to report to a job. Maybe you have a job, somebody told you they would hire you in December, but December is still a couple months away. If you're more than 30 days away from starting, all these other things are true, then you're unemployed. And you will be counted in the unemployment rate, which the government and economists will use to measure how our economy is doing. When we try to figure out what the unemployment rate is, well, it requires some very simple math. You have to take what we call the civilian labor force. And the civilian labor force is simply the number of people who are employed and the number of people who are unemployed. And if you add those two numbers together, you get the civilian labor force. Okay? So again, babies are not part of the civilian labor force. Retired people are not part of the civilian labor force because they are neither employed nor technically unemployed. Again, because they're not actively looking for work in the past week or waiting to be called back, etc. So when you get this total number, that's your civilian labor force. And what you do to calculate the unemployment rate is you simply take the number of unemployed people, okay, the people who don't have jobs, and you divide that by the total civilian labor force. That's confusing. So let me give you an example with some actual numbers that hopefully will make sense. Let's say that in our country, which these numbers aren't accurate by the way, but just pretend. Let's say that in our country we have 155.3 million employed people. These are people who have jobs. And we have 14.3 million unemployed people. These are people who don't have jobs, but they're looking for jobs, they want jobs, they're available, and they just don't have a job. If you add them together, you'll get the civilian labor force, which would be 169.6 million people. So then, if we took that 14.3 million, and we divided that by 169.6 million, then you would get an unemployment rate of 8.4%. And you probably don't know, but in our country, 8.4% unemployment is pretty high. we like to see unemployment be between about 3 to 5%. And 3 to 5% is sometimes considered normal. In fact, it's not even considered a problem. You almost never get 0% unemployment because there's always people transitioning in different phases of life, and there's other things that happen that we'll talk about in a minute that cause people to not have jobs and thus be unemployed. But anytime you get more than 5%, that is when economists start to notice, and that's when you can start to see that the economy has a problem. It's not employing the right number of people to be considered a healthy economy. Now, what causes unemployment? That should be the question. We're going to tackle this question again and again over the next few days, but let's go ahead and let's run through some reasons why people might be unemployed. The first thing that can cause unemployment, it's a set of natural things. There are naturally things that happen in people's lives that cause them to lose their jobs or to change jobs and have to look for new ones. And so we're going to zoom into these 4 things in a minute. We call them seasonal, frictional, structural, and cyclical causes. Okay? More on that in a second. The second thing that can cause unemployment is when businesses choose to fire their workers. And there are 2 specific things that businesses sometimes do, and that is called outsourcing and offshoring. We're not going to talk about that today, but we will talk about that in the next few days. The third thing that can cause unemployment is government decisions. Even though we know the government wants to help us find jobs, sometimes there are things that the government does that actually cost people their jobs. And one thing we'll talk about is a little bit controversial. Not everybody agrees that this causes unemployment, but some people do, and it's the issue of minimum wage. And again, we're not going to talk about that today. We will in the next week or so, okay? So let's zoom into the first one, this 4 natural types or causes of unemployment. There's one that's easiest to understand, and it's called seasonal unemployment. This is the idea that sometimes you need a job, if you're a business, you need to hire workers for a certain period of the year, maybe during summertime. For instance, Six Flags Great America is open during the summertime and then in October for Fright Fest. But then after that, they shut down. So you don't need your workers during, the remaining 8 months of the year. So those workers will be fired. They'll be let go. And when they're no longer employed at Six Flags, they will become what we call seasonally unemployed. The second type of unemployment is called frictional unemployment. And frictional unemployment involves the situation of when people are like between jobs, or maybe they're like in a new phase of life. So if I've just graduated from college and I've got my degree, I want to find a job as, let's say, a teacher. It might take me a few months before I get that job lined up. So that in between time, while I'm figuring out where I'm going to get my next job, I would be considered frictionally unemployed. Okay? The third one is called structural unemployment. With structural unemployment, what's going on is there is a mismatch between the jobs that are available and the workers who need jobs. So imagine a town where there's maybe 20 people who don't have jobs, and there are 20 job openings for helicopter pilots. Now you might look at that and think, 20 people, 20 jobs, perfect match. But what if those 20 people don't know how to fly a helicopter? Well, then they can't do that job, and they will be structurally unemployed. The final one is cyclical. And this one relates to the business cycle. That word in here, cyclical, cycle, business cycle, should ring a bell. Remember, the business cycle is that wave we've drawn of GDP. It's the peak, contraction, trough, recovery, expansion, peak. It's the normal ups and downs of our economy. And what's going on is that when GDP starts to drop, and it starts to go into a contraction phase, businesses aren't making as much money, and what they usually have to do is they have to start to fire workers. And when they fire workers, unemployment goes up, and that's called cyclical unemployment. And it's pretty bad. It happens when demand for your product drops, you don't make as much money, you have to fire your workers. Now here's the thing. If I could go back a slide. All 4 of these natural types of unemployment, while they're bad, there's also something about each of them that's like makes them sort of redeemable or makes them okay. So for instance, with seasonal unemployment, you know that the seasons will change and that you'll lose your job. So people who work at Six Flags, they plan on not having a job, in December and January and February. So you can plan on it. It's predictable. And maybe you go find a different job at Target or Walmart when it's the holiday season and people need jobs to buy and sell presents and stuff like that. For frictional unemployment, even though you might not have a job right now, if you just keep looking, theoretically, you'll be able to find a job and you can solve your own unemployment. For the structural, if you're a helicopter, if you don't have your skills to be a helicopter pilot, but there's a job opening, you can go learn how to fly a helicopter and then, boom, you will get that job and you will no longer be unemployed. But the cyclical unemployment, there's very little about this one that makes it okay, because as the economy drops, it's very hard to know how long that will last, when we'll trough, and when we'll finally start to get back on track, and you might get your job back. And this unemployment, cyclical, is the kind of unemployment that many families, people you might know, this is the kind that they suffered through when we went through our bad economic times starting in late 2007, early 2008. So, those are your 4 types of natural unemployment. So, what we're going to do tomorrow, let me explain what's going to happen tomorrow, is we are going to keep moving. So we covered this stuff, we just got that stuff done. Tomorrow we're going to tackle business decisions, outsourcing and offshoring, and the government decisions of the minimum wage. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back to the assignment that I've got for us here in Canvas and go ahead and look and see what the next thing is to do for your day. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye.